Good evening, and welcome to the William Sibley House, home of the Westborough Historical Society. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm Susan Lippitt, the president. The Westborough Historical Society was formed in 1889, I think that's the year, just a few years ago. We're working hard to bring Westborough's story to all of you. We have lots of events and presentations this coming year, some of which celebrate our nation's 250th birthday. Our next program is in October, the first Monday in October. Our programs are all listed on the website, so please check it out, but we have a lot of interesting things coming down the road. We hope you'll join us for that dynamic program. On Saturday, September 27th, we're going to have a front yard cleanup. You can tell we need a little love out there. So if you are gardeners and would like to join us that Saturday morning from 10 to 12, we're working on that. Please join us if that's in your bucket of interest. Please sign in if you haven't. I don't know where the sign-up sheet went, but Blair's in charge, so please make sure that you do that, especially if you'd like to be included on our email list so that we can keep in touch. Our fall schedules, we're supposed to be here tonight, but we were at an event yesterday and they haven't made it back to the house yet, but we will have them soon. And like us on Facebook, as they say. Now I'm going to turn the program over to Chris Allen, and she is going to introduce our guest speaker for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see you all. I think William Sibley would be so pleased to see people in his house. I'm Chris Allen. I'm the program chair of the Westborough Historical Society. And one thing I did want to mention is that October 3rd, which is the first Monday in October, we're having a special program of singing, dancing, storytelling of the Nipmunks, given by Maria from the Mashpee Nipmunk tribe, and it's going to be in a bigger place, which happens to be at St. Luke's Parish Center. So if you all come, it'd be fabulous. It's really a wonderful way. I've seen her program. She is a great representative of the tribe, but also gives us an idea of what the Nipmunks were like here. They lived here 8,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, and around the lakes. And we have artifacts in the Historical Commission of all kinds of things from the Nipmunks. So do come on October 3rd at 7 o'clock at St. Luke's Senior Center. But I'm delighted tonight to be able to introduce my good friend Phil Kittredge, who I know from a long time ago because we've been trading history facts, but Phil has me beat because he was born in Westborough and he knows the people. So he really is Mr. History in Westborough. He's a graduate of Westborough High School, and after college he was appointed to the Westborough Fire Department. So maybe some of you know him when he was a fireman. He worked there for 42 years before retiring in 2013. As our local historian, he has researched and discovered incredible images of Westborough in glass negatives, stereo views, postcards, thousands of them. Incredible. Maybe he'll say how many he has found throughout his life. But
Thousands.
He hasn't just piled them up. He's turned them into books, which is fabulous. And you can get these books at Tatnick,
Actually, I was at CVS the other day picking up a couple of gift cards. There it was right there. I was like, well, that's pretty cool.
Okay.
It's at CVS. You know you made it when your book's at CVS.
I guess I didn't make it. This is a series, and towns have different people doing these images of town, but they are a collection of all these wonderful photographs and postcards with history underneath them. So it's a great way of learning history and enjoying the photographs. So Phil wrote one on Westborough's general history, as well as a second one on Westborough State Hospital.
I assisted with photographs. I can't take the credit for the text, but I worked with Kate, and we went through and got a lot of the early images of the hospital from the glass negatives. If you've gone down to the pavilion, it's on the shores of Lake Chauncey, some of those pictures they were in the book and now mounted at the pavilion. That was a Eagle Scout project to build that.
So we're delighted to have our historian Phil share his research and photographs.
Well, thank you, Chris. It does just seem like it was not that long ago that we were working in my cellar when Chris said, I'm going to write a book about Westborough. And we went through thousands of photographs, and that's in the days when everything was done in a dark room. We'd take pictures and we'd copy them and make them into positives, and those went into the making of the book. We spent a lot of time going over stuff. And I still look for things. Matter of fact, I just acquired a stereo view this week that I've never seen before. And it's the construction of the reservoir for Sandu Pond. So a view that is, as far as I know, all the research I've done, we don't have any images, but now we do. So, all right. So, quick history. I went to college in Boston. I went to school for broadcast engineering. I wanted to repair these giant TV transmitters and radio transmitters, because I had worked at JJ Appliance in high school, and I learned how to repair TVs and radio. I wanted to do the biggest stuff. Well, I got stuck as a technician on one of the college radio station, going out helping on the technical side, and we got dispatched to a big fire right in the Fenway, and I was just absolutely starstruck by what the firefighters were doing. This is the old days, when they didn't have airbags. And they were going in and they were dragging out people, and they were reviving them, dragging them out. I said, boy, that's what I want to do. So I came back, I don't know, my second year of school, I told my father, that's what I want to do. He said, oh, good. But you're going to finish college first. Get your degree first and then you decide. So that's what I did. Finished school and ended up getting appointed to the fire department. And the rest is history. Went up and became senior captain and retired. And I'll tell you, best job around. I loved it. There's something about going into a scene when everybody's distraught, and you can help them out and make things better. And you leave the scene better than when you showed up. Unlike the police, which usually when there's a police officer at your house, it's not usually a good thing. But when the fireman shows up, when they get done, it's going to be a good thing. So having a little bit of knowledge about the history of the fire department, I put together this little show, and I promised this is a work in progress. I hope next year to have a more, not more polished, but a longer version with more content, including about 18 minutes of 16 millimeter color video that needs to be completely restored frame by frame and then digitized so it can be displayed. The film is so brittle. It was taken in 1947, so it's by Paul Boyce. So it needs to be restored before it can be shown. I hope to have that done by then. So a little about the fire department, okay? All right. Fire department's got a unique history in this town because the selectmen didn't want a fire department. Selectmen fought against establishing a fire department, just as they fought against establishing a high school in town. It took a lot of peer pressure. With the fire department, it resulted in all the factory owners banding together and demanding it be done. And in 1830, they actually had, all the factory owners had different people from their factories assigned to help if there was a fire at one factory, and they would all go and help. So in 1838, the town finally agreed that they would listen to the arguments, but it still didn't go anywhere. So the business owners of the hat shop, the box shop, all these other factories, all got together. They went into Boston and they persuaded the state legislature to create a fire department at Westborough, much to the chagrin of the Board of Selectmen. So at this point, they had to establish a fire department. So the town gave them some money, and we were able to purchase 24 feet of hose, some buckets, a single lantern, as you can see here. It cost the town a total of $600, total $600, and they were given the old hand tub that the unofficial fire department in town was using at the time. So the original hand tub that was purchased by the businesses in town failed in a house fire, and people are now starting to demand that the town do a little better job taking care of them. So the town voted at the town meeting to buy a new hand tub, and it was called the Chauncey. In the olden days, they didn't call them engine 1 or engine 2 or engine 3. Each piece of apparatus had a name. And you'll see that as we go on. Once the town got involved, it got very official. 16 pages of rules and regulations if you're on the fire department. So everyone was issued a book. You see this was originally issued to Orlando Leland in 1842, and it goes from everything about how he needs to act as a fire. If there's a fire, what happens? They all would respond on their own to the fire, and there would usually be a tent set up in the front lawn of where the fire was with a red lantern, and they'd all report to that area, and then they would be given their duties and their jobs. So, this was a common question asked. Why is everything burning down? Well, everything was burning down because if the equipment was inadequate, we knew that. They didn't have very many men, but the biggest problem was no water. The water was coming primarily from the reservoir in pipes about this big for the entire town.
I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
I made sure.
Yep. So, the old town hall. I don't know if anybody remembers the old town hall. I would doubt it. This was destroyed in 1927 or torn down. But this was their first fire department. This is where the fire department was based in Westborough. First fire department. You can see this little building right there. Well, we'll pay attention to that in a minute. It's the Baptist church. So underneath the town hall is a big garage door. That's where they stored the ladder truck. And out in back of the town hall, you see the town. This is a map. You see the town hall. You see the Baptist church. Well, back here, this is the carriage shed. That's where the two hose carts were kept, and the ladder truck was kept underneath the town hall here. Now this building here and this building were just extra buildings from the town. This building here, believe it or not, was actually moved up and is part of the present VFW that just got sold on Mill Street. One other company that was not official to the fire department was called the Young America Bucket Company. This was about 20 individuals. They had leather fire buckets, and they responded to the fires. And each of them, one of the fire buckets would hold about 2.5 gallons of water. So when your house is on fire, you knew that 20 guys with 2.5 gallons of water in each bucket. And then they had to run out and get them refilled. We're not going to do much work. But most of the problem with the fire department back then was the emphasis was on a social aspect, not on actually putting out the fires. being a firefighter back then was very romantic. You've probably seen it in all the Curry and Ives prints and lithographs, how dramatic it is. Well, that's what it was to be a fireman back then. It was a very important and highly respected position, even if you were just a volunteer fireman in town. So, 1879, They built a reservoir from the Sander family, and that's what's called Sander Pond. And the building in the background, that was actually used as the town poor farm for a period of time. And we actually have the records, well, I have the records, the library will be getting them soon, of the records of the poor farm from, for approximately 6 years. And it wasn't just a poor farm. People would have babies, they would bring the babies, and they would come up to the poor farm pregnant, and they would have the babies, and they would get help, and then they would go back home. So when they built
Do
this,
they come from all over the state, Phil, or like from Boston?
primarily just from Westborough.
Interesting.
Yep. The other problem that the town had is they had no water on the outskirts. Everybody, used a well, so they built as you can see, 12 small local reservoirs. Each one of these small reservoirs had about 12,000 gallons of water in them. So when the fire department came up, at least they had a little bit of water near the property. The farmers that were way out on the outskirt, they gave them their own fire extinguishers to use on site.
What's a hogshead?
Hogshead is, I think it's 83 gallons of water. That was just a term of measurement they used back then. So finally they built a fire station. This was the Envy in central Massachusetts. It was a beautiful station. You notice there's 4 doors. There were 4 rooms upstairs, and there were 4 doors. And there were 4 independent companies, not related to each other, that were housed in this building. Where before they would be housed in different areas. They still had their own chief, each one of these departments, and they operated independently from all the rest. So now, we had all 4 of the companies, but they're all in the same building. They weren't in different parts of town. So on the left you have the Chauncey Hose Company, which is the bottom rung. And when you, as if you went into the military, you started off as a private and you worked your way up. The same way here. Chauncey Hose Company was the bottom rung. The William Curtis Company, you see to the right of it with a big, you can see it printed on the side. These just carried hose, that's all they did. The difference between the William Curtis Hose Company and the Chauncey Hose Company, the Chauncey Hose Company was pulled by men, where the Curtis Hose Company was pulled by a team of horses. And then we have the Jackson Steamer, which is also pulled by a team of horses. And on the far end is the Rescue Hook and Ladder Company. And that served the town for, believe it or not, almost up until the mid-30s, that ladder. So this is the fire station when it was brand new in 1888. This was the grand opening of it. It had electricity. It did not have plumbing, but it did have electricity. So the next thing they did that came about is we had a fire alarm system. And the fire alarm system actually would control the bells on the top of the Baptist church and on top of the Congregational church. And I was recently invited up to the attic last fall, I guess. And the mechanism's still there. The big clapper and the mechanism, the relays are still there to ring the bell at on the church. And you can see back then, there was only 5 fire alarm boxes back then. Now there's presently over 300 in Westborough. Jackson Steamer Company had 20 members. 90% of the members of this were actually boiler firemen that worked in the factories that were running the steam boilers, because this was a regular steam powered piece of equipment. They had pressure gauges, they had to watch the pressure, they had relief valves. The pressure went too high, it could explode. So they need to have certified people to operate the equipment. The Rescue Hook and Ladder, that was the premier company to belong in Westborough, because here's all the glory. The glory was climbing up that ladder, rescuing that damsel in distress, throwing her over your shoulder, and then coming down the ladder and becoming the hero. Just as you'd see in the old lithographs.
Phil, were these volunteer companies?
These were all volunteer companies. And again, they were all independent at this point too. Here's the Chauncey Hose Company. This is to the left of that, the old fire station. Again, this is the cart that they pulled. Usually took 4 men to pull this. There's a noted exception where they commandeered a streetcar, a trolley car, because of a fire way down South Street. And on the way to the fire, they hopped on the back of the trolley car and they held on to it and they had the trolley car bring them to the fire. Clever guys. So everybody loves a fireman, and that's exactly what it was back then. The town, if you look at the history, the town was famous for their parades. Memorial Day Parade, 4th of July Parade. They used to have a big field day, which started in the center of town with a road race that ended up at Lake Chauncey, and then swimming competitions from Lake Chauncey across to the state hospital. And you'll notice in this picture, you see what's in the background? It's a freight train rolling through the center of town. Everybody, I put a post up on Facebook not too long ago, and I talked about the problem with everybody saying, well, the Rotary's outlived its usefulness, we need to do this and that. And I said, well, yeah, but you think it was bad now. We had 20 trains a day running through the center of town, and we had 3 different trolley lines that all merged in the center of town. There were numerous reports of horses getting hit by the trolley cars, of people getting hit by the trains. The trains were fine as long as the guy in the little booth didn't have a little too much beer the night before and was asleep, because if he didn't hear that telegraph notice to put the gates down, the train came roaring through town, the freight trains, and with no warning. There was no flashing lights or any of that stuff back then. So 1918 was a huge change. The town ordered that there were no more individual companies. Everybody was now going to belong to the Westborough Fire Department. They hired a full-time firefighter, Ed Hogan. He worked 7 days a week. As you can see, he had 2 days off each month. And he got paid $1,000 a year for that. Again, at the same time, they gave a lot more of the soda ash extinguishers out to the farms. And we had 4 housemen. These were volunteer firefighters that lived at the fire station in those rooms upstairs. That tradition was actually carried on, believe it or not, until the early 90s. They were paid callmen. They were paid $400 a year to live at the fire station. They worked other jobs, but when they were there at night, they were required to hop on the fire truck and go on the calls right away. Because remember, back, even up until the early, I would say, early 70s, when I got on, there was only one firefighter a shift working. And if there was a fire, the firemen had to come from their house down to the fire station, hop on the fire truck and drive the fire truck to the fire. And this is what they drove. This was the Little Chauncey. They still carry the names even almost into the 50s. This is the Little Chauncey. It was primarily a brush truck. They had a little pump right here. That's the only pump. And they had small hose, as you can see how small it was. Now this was taken right across the street from the fire station. They're standing in the door of the fire station looking. There were 3 different gas stations across the street there. There was a Esso station. There was some of you remember maybe Travis Texaco station was there. That's where National Glass is now. Go back a little further, Joe's Jenny gas station, Joe Antonio. He had a gas station there, and then he had a car wash, and he converted that into a package store. There's a big news when the fire trucks, when the town got a new fire truck, all the towns. It was a big social event. They had dancing and dinners at the town hall. They would have them at the Oddfellows Hall, and sometimes they had them at the Grand Army of the Republic Hall, which is on South Street. And the fire trucks were on display for everybody to look at. This was the 1937 Maxim fire truck. This had a pumper on it. It had wooden ladders, and the wooden ladders would extend up to 50 feet. And they weighed close to 200 pounds. Took 5 guys to put up that ladder. Only had two seats, and the Fay family, Kendall Fay and Pete Fay, always were designated as the ladder truck operators when they called them, because this was a very heavy, delicate piece of equipment to operate, and it was dangerous if you had somebody who was not familiar to operate it. Now, we had a fire dog, and at one point we had 5 little puppy fire dogs at the fire station. I've got a great picture of them sitting in a life preserver on the back of one of the trucks. But they had a naming contest. Let's be creative. Let's call the dog Smokey. Now, Smokey always rode to the fires on the ladder truck, and despite most people thinking that the fire dogs were only there to help the firefighters find the fire hydrants, not true. The fire dog was used to protect the equipment on the ladder so people wouldn't steal and take things off. Now, the little metal helmet here that came in the late 30s, that's the type of helmet I was issued when I got on the fire department in 1970. A metal fire helmet, which was ideal if you went into a building with wires hanging from the ceiling. I could light up like a Christmas tree. This was the small Dodge. This was the big Dodge. This was in the 40s. The town really spent some money to upgrade the fire department a little bit. And if you look in the background, what do we see back here? The Strand movie house.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, the condo complex, which is built on the site of that, is known as Strand Condominium Complex. And if you go in, you'll see a couple of beautiful Strand movie posters that I donated to the developer that built that building, Ed Bloom from Southborough. By 1953, we still had a call chief and a head engineer. Now, Bill Parker on the left, his son Donald's here tonight. And Mr. Happiness himself, Harry Woodman. This is the only picture of all the pictures I have of Harry where he's got a smile on his face. And trust me, even the pictures that were when they had a fire and he was in the newspaper, awful scowl. And Fran Bulger. Now, Fran Bulger, when Fran Bulger retired, I was hired to replace him as a full-time firefighter.
Who were the other two in that?
Sorry. It's Rocco Polini.
Yeah.
Deputy.
Yep. And then we had Win Spinney. Yep. He was the chief. Rocky ended up becoming the chief after Win retired. And he was actually the town's first full-time fire chief. In 1957, we were still operating a ladder truck that was over 20 years old. We still had these fire trucks which were 10 years old, and we had the newest engine. Every one of these fire trucks, believe it or not, came from Woodville. They're one of the largest fire truck manufacturers in New England was based right in Woodville, Mass., the Farrer Company. And the Farrer family still has descendants here in Westborough. Kevin Farrer, Dave Farrer, were both appointed full-time firefighters in the fire department. And their father, Dave Farrer Sr., he was a call member on the fire department. He worked at Bay State. We had one other oddball truck. It belonged to the Westborough Civil Defense Department, and they let us have it. And so we painted it red with a gallon of paint, with a little hose on the back. And this was the brush fire truck that Westborough used for many years. It was also the truck that we took to Westborough Speedway when they had demolition derbies. Yep. So that's where this is taken, up at in the infield at Westborough Speedway. Now, this truck was coming back from a night of thrills and spills at Westborough Speedway, and it was hit head-on by a drunk driver about 50 feet away from the fire station. And the truck was totaled.
Oh, wow.
And now a few big fires. This is what you're all here for, I know. That's why I put big flames here. All right, the first big notable fire was at the Massachusetts State Reform School. Long before the Lyman School, the state built the first reform school for juvenile boys in Massachusetts. And it's, depending on which historical records you look at and the way they word it, this was the first publicly funded state reform school in the country. It was built on the northwest shores of Lake Chauncey. It was designed to hold 300 boys. Established in 1848, it became overcrowded rather quickly, so they put on numerous additions. It had a terrible reputation as far as there were no criteria or guidelines for who could be an employee of the reform school. A lot of the men were mean to the boys. To give you an idea, some of the boys, they range from age 6 up to 17. Some of the boys were committed to the hospital, or not the hospital, to the reform school for offenses of stealing an apple off a cart. A lot of the boys were neglected by their families. The Westborough Library has got the most spectacular, in my opinion, piece of ephemera that the town has. It's the first log book and record of every child sentenced to the state reform school. Their name, their parents' name, their parents' occupations, where their parents were from. And when I was going through it, it was interesting. You know, Italian mother, Italian father, American father, American mother, Irish father, Irish mother, circles.
Oh.
So what that meant was, who knows? Maybe it meant that this could be a troublemaker, maybe the history. And if you look, they actually wrote in there the conditions of the parents. Mother, wonderful, loving, goes to church. Father, drunk most of the day. So it gave them kind of a little bit of a history of what's going on with the boy. So the whole section to the right of that, there you see the building with the two towers, and there's a small add-on, but the building to the right of that, the building behind that, was all destroyed in a massive fire set by one of the boys in 1859. The school was rebuilt, but in the meantime, one of the large factories in the center of town housed 300 boys for over a year, right in the center of town. Now, this is again from another lithograph. This is the lithograph that I was recently able to acquire. You can see the main building over there on the left, and then we've got the addition, and then you can see where they put their new rebuild portion all on. They built a new chapel, new secure areas for the boys, and it became more secure. They learned a lot. Just because a kid was 12 or 13 years old doesn't mean he could be violent, which was part of the problems with the original building. They were maybe perhaps a little too trusting that the boys were going to be fine. Well, they weren't. Now, again, located on the northern shore of Lake Chauncey, recognized as the oldest publicly funded school in the country. In 1882 and 1883, the legislature had 7 months of hearings, and they heard all sorts of horror stories about how the boys were treated. And one of the interesting things is that the state has said that there were never any state hospital patients buried at the state hospital along the shores of Lake Chauncey. However, they neglect to tell you that there are over 55 boys buried on the shores of Lake Chauncey from the state reform school. They built a cemetery there, they built a crypt. Reverend Sleeper, who was the minister at the time in the 1850s, wrote in his journal that the boys would have a service up in the chapel, and 2 boys would pull a little cart with a coffin on it and bring it down underneath the oak trees along Lake Chauncey, and the boys would be buried with no markers. There was if you remember, there was an individual who was trying to get the state and the town to address the issue and try to determine where the graves were, so some sort of a memorial can set up, or at least just fence off the area where they believe the cemetery was. The town initially gave them permission. For some reason, a short time afterwards, the town revoked permission for them to do ground penetrating radar research, and that individual and his associates were issued a no trespass order. And no explanation has ever come from the state or from the town of exactly why this happened. They said part of it is, well, they cut down bushes they shouldn't have. That was the official reason that they've given out. So some of these buildings actually became part of the insane hospital. Now, the ironic thing about the state reform school is they actually had their own fire department. These were boys that were trustworthy, were considered of good character, but still had to serve out their time there. And they were actually able to assist on the fires, because there were a lot of fires you had to realize back then. Everything was, there were coal stoves, there was, cooking was a lot done by wood. It wasn't uncommon to, burn the brush. We have the trolley cars that would go by, and sparks might come from the wheels, sparks might come from the wires. So they had two pieces of equipment. The piece on the far left is the hose cart, and the piece in the middle was the hand tub. That was referred to as the lineman. And that was named after George Lyman, who was a trustee of the state hospital that gave all the money to establish the Lyman School on Oak Street. One of the other things, other than the fires up at the state reform school, and those fires continued on even until the Lyman School on Oak Street. There were multiple fires in buildings. The boys would manage to set fires in attempts to escape. So down in the center of town, most of the center of town was destroyed by fire. We have 2 blocks, the corner block, the Eagle block. Now, does this look familiar, or the style of the building look familiar? This is the building right at the corner of West Main Street and South Street. Now, what's unique about this building, and I like it, is you notice you have a sign, Mr. Griggs. That was a dry goods store. But Mr. Griggs also had an entrance on South Street, and then we had a small store in the corner. That's identical to the layout of the building that replaced this in the 1890s. The Westborough package store, you could go in one door, you could go out the other door. And then, for many of you remember, there was a jewelry store in the corner for many, many years.
Yes.
And now I think there's an attorney's office there. The Westborough Savings Bank was on the 2nd floor. So if you had lots of money, you could come to the bank. Up here on the roof, you see all these windows?
Yeah.
And you see this? This is a giant skylight, because that was a photography studio. Westborough had 9 commercial photographers operating in Westborough around the turn, before and just after the turn of the century. That's why there are so many images of Westborough. There are, I guarantee you, 1,000 more images of Westborough than there are of Shrewsbury.
Wow.
And then I'll explain to you why we had so many photographers in this town. You'll notice up here, we have another photographer. We've got this is originally, was a drugstore, but he was also a dentist. So if you had a dental problem, you can go in there and get it taken care of. Up here again, we've got another photographer based in this building. This is on South Street, very similar to where Red Barn Coffee Roasters is located right now. Before and after.
Wow.
1873. These views, they're not as clear as some of the others, because these are from stereo views. Stereo views, if you remember, they had the little viewer, they had 2 images, and you go back and forth and you look at it, for the trash guys. I remember them fondly because when I was young, I would go to the public library downtown. On the right-hand side, where the fancy chairs were in the fireplace, they would have some stereo views and a stereo viewer. And they were 3-dimensional, just like the Viewmasters from the 50s and 60s, same thing. And I was totally fascinated with it. So I remember looking at some of these pictures, not that I remember what they were then, I remember looking at these pictures, 70 years ago. which is kind of neat when you think about it. So, the fire was started by Antonio Joan. He lived in upstairs over the Eagle Block, and he had an anger towards the landlord, and unfortunately his fire spread to all the other buildings. Now the Whitney House, very famous family in town, we know that, in Whitney Street, Eli Whitney Street. The Whitney House, actually on Route 9, I don't know how many remember the Whitney House restaurant, where the Honolulu became, and now we're, we have the little Italian restaurant, pizza place. So the Whitney House was built by Mr. Whitney. He actually owned a large lumber mill and box company in town, and he owned 2 or 3 other lumber mills throughout town. Mr. Reed, who ran the hotel for Mr. Whitney, had these little cards mailed. These are about the size, a little bigger than a business card. He would get the young boys from town, 5, 6, 7 years old. He would send them down into the center of town when the trolleys came in, and he would send them down to the train station. So the trains came in, the boys would give the traveling salesman that came off the trains their card, and they would carry the bags up Brigham Street through the center of town and up to the hotel, and Mr. Reed would give them whatever pittance they deserved for bringing a customer up. The reason that we had this hotel is because we had traveling salesmen. There was no railroad in Marlborough, no railroad in Northborough. The train came through Westborough, and when it came through Westborough in the 1830s, the whole emphasis of Westborough business and everything shifted from Route 9 to the center of town. You know, we had the Western Tavern, we had the Fortis Shop, we had all of these businesses up there, Willow Park, all of these businesses. When the railroad came to center of town, everything stopped up there. And you'll see why as we explain. So, here's the Memorial Cemetery right across from the town hall and the Baptist church, and here's the Whitney House. Right where the present high school is. And here's one of Mr. Whitney's is where they had the offices here. Back here we had a blacksmith shop, a livery, a stable. So the traveling salesman could come in, come off the train, they could get a small cart, they could get a horse, and they can now take their salesman samples or the book of the products that they're selling and go to all the little different businesses in the surrounding towns and come back to the Whitney House at night, sleep, get up the next morning and go out again, maybe over towards Milford, over towards some of the other areas. Once the trolley cars came in, the trolleys went trolleys down, so they didn't have, the Whitney House didn't really fulfill that need for them anymore. They could hop on the trolley car and they could go to all the way to Milford from the center of Westborough on a trolley car. They could go to North Grafton, Upton. They could go to Marlborough. They could actually go all the way to Worcester on a trolley car. This is what a salesman would have. He'd rent a little buggy like this, and off he'd go. Of course, he'd have his little bow tie on, and his little hat, and his suit, because if you look at the pictures of Westborough from the 1880s, 1890s, everybody dressed up. They didn't go out on the streets of Westborough unless they were dressed up. Now we have wide streets. Not that great to walk on, but you see we have some sidewalks because the streets were full of dirt and horse poop. We did have a water wagon that was pulled by a horse, a big, huge wooden drum on the back of it that they would sprinkle water on the streets to try to keep the dust down. But a very dirty and dusty area. So here we have a beautiful picture of the hotel. Again, Class A building, beautiful apartments, one of the first buildings in Westborough to be fully electrified, and it also had indoor plumbing. You can see in the back a little bit of the blacksmith shop and the livery in the back. And all these these beautiful cast iron posts up front to hitch your horse up. Over here, we had Mr. Lowe, E.C. Lowe. He was one of the biggest pharmacists in town in the 1880s, right in the center. And we had a a small dry goods store. We also had a place where you could get leather goods, whether you needed a saddle repaired, a stirrups, you could get them right here. Everything you needed was available here at the hotel, and it was a beautiful hotel, beautiful wrought iron railings. You get with pictures of the hotel residents just sitting outside in the sun and enjoying the weather. But this is what happened. Now, this is a brick building. Well, that shouldn't have burned. Well, brick buildings are 90% wood. The only thing that's brick is just the outside. Everything is wood inside. And, oh, it was electric. Well, how could that have possibly happened? They had electricity in there. Unfortunately, on the top floor, they had 2 kerosene lanterns that hung from the ceiling over the pool tables. And one of the kerosene lanterns exploded. And that was enough to start the fire. And as I'll explain later on, there was never enough water to shoot more than 10 feet up in the air. Back view of it from by the stable and the blacksmith shop. You'll notice that the front wall is still standing and you still get smoke coming up. This was probably taking the day of the fire.
What year was that?
This was, oh, you had to ask me.
Approximately?
This is, I think, around 1896.
Okay.
No, 1906, I think.
Okay.
1905, 1906.
Did everybody survive?
Oh, yeah, no, there were no injuries. That's what's the amazing thing was. You gotta realize too that these fires started out small. So there were a lot of times there was plenty of time for people to get out. It's just that the fire department didn't have the equipment to put them out.
Would there have been fire insurance?
Oh, yeah. One of the biggest insurance companies in town was Fairbanks Insurance. And, but most of these, Fairbanks Insurance mostly did homeowners and residential from the records that I've seen. They did some small buildings, but most of these buildings, big buildings, were insured through programs through the banks, you know, or whoever financed them. So that they weren't about to lose their money.
Phil, what street is in front?
We're actually right now on Parkman Street.
Okay.
You knew that, I could tell.
So this is where the Forbes building is now?
Yes, and between the Forbes, you know, where the parking lot is next to the building, this is where some of the other little buildings were. And then behind that, actually where, you know, the town's got the old Explorer Post Garage and there's a couple of buildings back there. That's where the livery and the stables were. Because it's a big property. It goes all the way back to the house on Underwood Court, behind Underwood Court. Goes all the way up and then back to Grove Street. So, again, money was to be made from disasters. Okay, it was 1907. There's the postcard. Because we had so many photographers, one of the ways they would, besides doing commission work, which a lot of the nice houses and the big houses in town and the buildings, that was what commercial works. The owner of the house or the owner of the factory would hire them to take a picture of their building for the different brochures that they might make. So, that's why, and all the glass negatives were saved. And they're still out there. I picked up close to 200 glass negatives in Westborough 2 years ago from a collector down the Cape. So they're still out there. So these guys would go out with their cameras, take the pictures, go back to the photo studio, print them up. Sometimes the same day they would be back on the street hawking their postcards to people that wanted from souvenirs. But it usually wasn't until the following day when everybody started coming out by train or came out, because this was big news, big deal back then. So this one particular photographer took 4 different views of this, and these were all 4 of these were veiled by the same person, to that lady that you see on the back of that first card. And it's different views. Now here, the buildings are still upright. that night, the following night, they had a lot of wind and rain, and it toppled the whole front of the building into the street. Now, there was a lot of ruins left in this building for a long period of time. It was never developed, and typical of the generosity of the Forbes family, they paid to have that cleaned up, and they built the present, the high school that is the present police station. They did the same thing on East Main Street after the big fire, and cleaned that area all up, and they built and donated the Forbes Community House to the town. They were a very, very generous family, and Mrs. Forbes did not like to see clutter and disarray in her beautiful town.
How did they make their money?
I'm not exactly sure.
You want to, I'll
Chris?
let you go on, but what happened was that Fanny Hooker in Chicago was the daughter of Mr. Hooker, who was redeveloping Chicago. And at that point, he discovered a chiclet machine in the basement of one of the buildings he was renovating. And he thought, oh, maybe I'll make some chiclets. But Mr. Wrigley had other ideas. And he said, I'll buy you out. So Mr. Hooker very cleverly said, sure. Mr. Hooker became very rich, as did Fanny Hooker Forbes. Frank Forbes did not have any money. He was a shopkeeper. But Mr. Hooker, when Frank was out in Chicago, liked this young man and hooked him up with his daughter.
And despite what they say, Frank Forbes wasn't looking for a hooker, he was looking for a woman. Just remember that. So, we're moving up to 1908, only a year later. Multiple buildings were again destroyed. The warehouse and the factory of the Foster Richardson company, and they sold beds all across the country. They had a huge showroom in New York City, and if you wanted a top-of-the-line, expensive brass bed, they're the ones that made it. Besides the factory, multiple tenement houses, same thing, were destroyed. The Armour Beef Company warehouse, and it smelled like a barbecue for several days, I'm sure it must have. So let's take a look. This is what Westborough was like in the 1880s, 1890s. The railroad tracks came through the center of town. The railroad tracks that you see up on the right are the proposed railroad tracks, and that came through in the 1900s, when they relocated the railroad tracks to their present location. But as you can see, all the different railroad sidings, because everything in that part of town was all industrial, with large factories, huge buildings, and close together. Now remember, we don't have the firefighting equipment they have now, and even today, if those great big old wooden buildings, if they caught fire department would be very, very hard pressed to stop the fire from just jumping from one building to another. So is everybody familiar with where we are?
Yep.
Okay. This is, and I refer to the square. Everybody says, well, why do they call it Westborough Square? Because if you look, it looked like a square back then. It really did. So now we call it the Rotary, or the center of town. So, typical of manufacturing back then, they would start with one building, build another building, and need another addition, put on another building, and need another addition, build another building, and just connect them. Next thing you know, you get a building 1,000 feet long, and all connected, so when there's a fire in one, it just goes to the other. And here's the aftermath. As you can see upstairs, you can see the brass beds that we saw in that little ad that was running in New York. Destroyed the building, destroyed, according to the records, over 3,000 beds, most of them ready for shipment. Here's part of the problem again with manufacturing and buildings at that time. You had a brass bed and it needed to be shipped to New York. How did you ship it? You put it in a wooden box and you fill the box with Excelsior. And then you close it up. So there was Excelsior all over the floor, there was wood stacked everywhere for all of these. So it just made a,
So how long did it take you to colorize this?
colorizing is, believe it or not, the hardest part. The hardest part is taking the negative and cleaning it. Cleaning it because most of the, these are all over 100 years old. Usually families of mice and chipmunks have decided to settle in. They left stains, they left crustaceans. So it takes a lot of work with a razor blade, distilled water, swabs, get them clean. And then the first thing, once you get it all clean, then I polish the glass. And then I scan it on a commercial scanner that's designed for glass negatives. And the key is having a good, high quality black and white image. And from there, then you can go in and you can start to put in some colors. And the problem with these is the colors are subjective. It's what I like. There's no way I can ever know what the accurate colors were. I can't tell if the walls upstairs were light green. I can't tell if that guy had a blue jacket on. So you try to go with generic colors to try to make it, feel period. And the same with all the buildings that you see, that everything that you see here tonight was all originally in black and white. Everything that's color, I've colorized. So some I spend more time than others on, some you don't because the quality isn't there to begin with. You have to have a good, high quality black and white image to start with.
So before you, so that building just burnt.
Right.
What are all those people doing? Are they scavenging looking for scrap brass that they can steal out of it?
Probably that's most of the employees.
Oh,
This burned during the day.
so they went after the fire, they went back in
They
with
went
their
back in,
personal
yep.
belongings maybe? or
And some of
something?
those may be actually volunteer firemen that worked at the factories. That was very
Oh,
common.
yeah.
Even up until the early 70s, Bay State Abrasives had 20 call firefighters that worked at Bay State. They actually had their own fire alarm tapper, and if there was a fire, the alarm came in, it would ring in the Bay State machine shop, and the machine shop would put a page out over the system. Now, Westborough firefighters report to Box 21, the Westborough State Hospital.
Yeah.
And they had private parking spots right by the door to get out quick.
Reserved parking. Pretty cool, huh? I thought so.
But that wood did not burn.
That same fire burned down the Armor Beef packing plant. This is one of the warehouses. That's the Jackson steamer. And you can see the size of the hoses going in there. They're not very big. So, because there was just no water. What was it good for? Wetting down the embers, to be honest with you. It really was. It's not a very nice thing to say, but that's all.
And the steam is used to power the pumps?
Yeah, the steamer, here's an example of the steamer. Here's the steamer on the back. The steam pressure would actually power a pump. Very similar to what the factories would have. But this would pump water. That fire brought steamers from the Worcester Fire Department on flat car, just like this. It was down in it was beautiful because it was right in the industrial area where all the railroad sidings were. So they brought the stuff in by rail car. 12 minutes to get from Worcester to Westborough with that steamer.
Wow.
And that was used with fire. And after the fire, load them back on the train and ship them back to Worcester.
I don't think they could do 12 minutes today.
No way.
So this isn't a big fire, but this is one of my favorite pictures. This is 30 East Main Street. This is the house right at the corner of High Street that they just restored. Yep, all restored. It's absolutely beautiful inside. The original spiral staircase is still intact in the front. There's 3 apartments in there now. It is absolutely beautiful. I went through there with the contractor after it got finished, and I gave the owner of the property pictures such as this so he could have them for his file. And the builder just couldn't believe it. That this is what it looked like, and it doesn't look a lot different. Now, there's the house on fire, that same house. Now, this fire, and this is what's interesting, May 14th, 1911. How do we know exactly for sure? Because the photographer wrote that on the little envelope. The photographer was living across the street and took pictures of the fire. Those are the fire department horses that pull the steamer down. They would take the horses, disconnect them, tie them away from the fire. Now the other interesting thing is you see all that black smoke? That's not from the fire, that's from the steamer. That's the steamer making all the smoke. So, looks like, hopefully most of the fire is out. When I talked to one of the contractors, they did observe some fire damage when they're doing the renovations, but it wasn't extensive. So being maybe close to the center of town and a small fire, they got there quick enough and they were able to knock it down and save the house. That wasn't always the case. And thank goodness those steamers went away and they came up with equipment like this. Now this was, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the old soda and acid fire extinguishers. They held about 2.5 gallons of water. They were copper. They had a little hose on the side, and they were stored upright. When you turn them upside down, there was a glass container with a lead plug full of acid. That will mix with the water and the bicarb that was in the water. That would produce a gas, and that would push the water out of the little hose. You would get more out of your spray nozzle in your kitchen sink than you would get. This was almost the same idea, but this has 2 large tanks about the size of your water tank, your water heater, right here. See them? They get big wheels on. These are the acid charges. What would happen is they get to the fire, they take off the cap, they dump that on there, dump all the acid in, put the cap back on, spin that back and forth, agitate it, and that would give them enough pressure to shoot the water about 10, 12 feet in the air. But not very much, only about 40 gallons from each tank. That was the first motorized fire truck. Now, in 1917, it's called the East Main Street Conflagration. Well, it really was. It was huge. This is in the area of where Bay State Commons is now, starting from the center of town, all the way down to the Keating block, or the Oddfellows block, where I think the Borough project is. Another Borough project. A little antique and gift shop in the Keating building. All on that side of the street. And there were multiple buildings out back. And here's where it starts. It starts right here. This is the Staples block. That gentleman that took the pictures, he was living in the apartment above this building. So that's how he got over here to take the picture of that fire very quickly. This is the National Straw Works. This is all Straw Works back here. These are all different manufacturing companies. These are all different companies back here. There's the Bedstead Company, the Lumberyard, the Box Company, the National House, the Trunk and Bag Building, all of these buildings. And again, there was many, many more little warehouses and buildings all throughout here, including blacksmith shops and other warehouses. Here's a colorized negative. And again, my suspicion is where this was lettered on the glass negative, the National Straw Works, this was probably a consignment, a piece that the photographer went to take this picture for the company. At the heyday, this factory employed over 1,800 people in tiny little Westborough. The population then, about that time, was probably around 5,000. So people came to town by trolley, and this is where they would work. The ironic thing about this, they actually had their own, it looked like a small cruise ship, but it was a big freighter, and it went from Boston over to Europe with products from the National Straw Works, and they actually flew their own National Straw Works flag on the ship. There's a great lithograph of that. So we have a 5-story building. absolutely enormous, full of straw hats and straw material all over the floor. But because it was such a mass production operation, within 10 years they were gone, they were closed, because because it was such a big operation and mass production, they couldn't keep track and keep up with the change in people's tastes and styles. Because of that, they failed.
So did they rebuild after the fire?
No.
So once the fire happened, that was
Yeah,
it?
you'll see, yes. You'll see. This is in this picture here, this is the Westborough Inn. But originally, this is probably after the National Straw Works closed in the early 1890s. Originally, this was built as a residence for employees of the National Straw Works. They lived in the rooms upstairs, they could walk right next door to work. It was a company house. And inside, there was a company bar room, and in the back, a small company restaurant where they could eat. So every week, they could get their room, they could get their liquor, they could get their food, and the following week it'd be all deducted from their pay. You can start to see some of the buildings in the back of the building. On the right, this is the Staples block. The Adams Express Company was right here. The gentleman that took a lot of these pictures lived in this building. He's the one that took the picture of the fire. He was an agent for the Railway Express Company, and he'd come in and he spent a year and a half in Westborough persuading the owners of Adams Express to sell to Railway Express Agency. And they eventually did. This also had offices at a small showroom for the Humber Bicycle Factory, which was down on Beach Street. They produced bicycles there for a short period of time, and actually some of the bicycles that were produced there went over to Europe with a special version, and today will command between $10,000 and $15,000 if you're lucky enough to find one of these old original bikes made in Westborough. And if you look very carefully, it's hard to see, but on the side, that's a sign for the Humber Bicycle Factory. And it's pointing down towards Beach Street. And as times change, remember, we had horses had to get phased out, we had bicycles, everybody had bicycles. Bicycles got phased out with the automobile. And the bicycle shop actually became a locomobile factory for a short period of time before they moved to Connecticut. So the locomobiles were actually manufactured in Westborough. So, the big fire. So it destroyed over 20 buildings. It burned everything from the center of town all the way to the Keating block. The Keating block did catch fire. However, because it was all brick and it was plaster on the inside, it was very, very well constructed. The firefighters were able to contain the fire and stop the fire there. Newspaper reports state that if it wasn't a change in the wind direction and it started to sprinkle, everything on both sides of East Main Street, all the way from the center of town to the railroad track, would have been destroyed. As it was, over 20 buildings. The Staples block, that last building I showed you that had the Railway Express Agency building, that's to the right. National Straw Works is right in the building. The Westborough Trunk and Bag and the Westborough Inn, the little rooming house that I showed you, they were all destroyed. Gets a better view of it, gives you a little better perspective. Westborough had no water for 2 days. They had no electricity in part of the town that had electricity for 2 weeks. Part of the telegraph service was down, and that was important because anybody that wanted to receive telegrams, they weren't able to receive them, so they were sent to other towns. This is a widely publicized photo. This one's been around for a lot of people to see. I love the old cars. Again, well, people coming down to sightsee and see what's going on. You see one guy looking in there, what's burning down there? Something's still burning. On the lunch cart, you'll see in the back, the blacksmith shop, you can see the horseshoe hanging out the building. One of the things that's interesting that I learned is, if you look at a lot of the old buildings, even down Westborough, outside the pharmacist, there's a big gold leaf mortar and pestle. If you look at the spectacle shop, the eyeglass shop,
there's a big pair of sunglasses outside. You go by the dentist, there's a great big gold-plated tooth. Because a fair amount of the population right there was illiterate. They knew how to talk, they didn't know how to read. So they couldn't read pharmacists or dentists. So that's why a lot of that stuff is still around. Now, another interesting little bit of trivia. The wagon wheels of this cat sat until the mid-1980s in the basement of Daisy's Diner, which is the Korean restaurant now, until they were brought to somebody's attention and they were removed. But the wheels for that lunch cat right there. So the Bartlett Box and Lumber Company, again, everything was shipped by train, and we had Westborough had this fair amount of agriculture and dairy farms, but what it was known for was manufacturing. And anything that you manufactured, whether it be a bicycle, whether it be straw hats, anything, bicycle accessories. With every industry, there was always a bunch of industries that popped up deciding to support it. Everything had to be shipped by train, and it had to be crated in boxes. So the facilities were huge. The lumber came in, the boxes were custom built for whoever needed, and then they were shipped out.
It previously said boxes in shooks. What is that?
If I said that, it's just that my lips weren't working.
No, the slide.
Oh,
Prior slide, yeah.
well, let me go back.
Boxes in shooks by the carload.
Oh, you know,
What are shooks?
I do not know.
Mike, what
And
are
I'm
shooks?
sorry you brought that up, because now I'm gonna have to find out. Because that's a good question. Anybody here know what a shook is?
No.
Google. I'm all shook up.
Somebody Google that up, because we need to find out what a shook is real quick. This is when the lumber came in, and then we got all stacked, and it was quite an operation. Now, what's ironic about this, the owner's son was playing with matches. The building burned down.
Oh,
Yes.
a shuck was a bundle of wooden slats cut to size and shape, ready to be assembled into a box.
There we go, look at that. See, thank you very much. You win the special box award tonight. A little round of applause for the building was rebuilt, and now this is again the Bartlett Box Factory. He was the son-in-law of Christopher Whitney, who built the Whitney House. His daughter married Mr. Bartlett, and the lumber business changed over to the Bartlett Lumber Company, and he took over the business. It was rebuilt, and they continued for many years. Now, many people didn't know that before the present St. Luke's, there was another St. Luke's. And before that St. Luke's, there was a third St. Luke's. Well, the first St. Luke's was up on the corner of Milk Street, near Phillip Street. That burned down in 1886. So they built a second church, the corner of Ruggles, West Main, as you can see. Beautiful wooden church. That also burned in 1920. The present church, built out of brick, was built in 1921.
That looks like the rectory next to it.
It is the old.
Yep, the old rectory, yep. And that's the only church fire in Westborough. Church fires were very, very common throughout New England. Large churches built, the design of them, everything wide open. A lot of them had ventilation in the floor. They would come in and let the cooler air come in, go up through the church and go up through the top to keep the church cooler in the summer. That's a recipe for disaster if there's a fire. This is a picture of the inside of that church. You notice the present St. Luke's carries very, very similar architecture over to it. Now, I heard an interesting comment, and I didn't realize it until I saw this. They would always place when these churches were built, a lot of them were built with the entrance of the church going east and west. And they did that because when the sun would come up in the morning, the sun would come through all those stained glass windows. And they would create a more religious feeling, or a little more, it helped with the atmosphere inside the church. I don't know whether that was true for all churches, but if you look at the churches in Westborough, you know, the Baptist church, Unitarian church, Congregational church, they all go east-west. And maybe that's because West Main Street goes north-south too.
Phil,
Yes.
here's your definition.
Oh, shook. Yes. All right. Staves and headings, usually also used for building casks or barrels too. There's a lot of stuff, just like when they shipped on the ships, they used to ship them in barrels because wooden crates were hard to move. You've probably seen the pictures of the great big netting just full of wooden barrels and put them in the holes of the ships. The big one. Now every town has a big one.
20 buildings.
That's a 20.
No, that wasn't big enough. So in 1947, not that long ago,
No.
the size of these buildings is very deceiving from the photographs. These were enormous buildings. I don't know if any of you remember the Chase Paper building that was on Milk Street.
Yes,
Okay.
worked there.
Figure buildings 2 and 3 times the size of that, and 5 stories tall. These windows were about 8 feet tall, so that gives you an idea of the height of the buildings. You can see the trolley tracks going down on the right, on the left, those are the railroad tracks, because there were railroad sidings up Milk Street to supply these buildings. Here's what happened. It caught fire. Now, we're not doing bad here. We're hitting the 3rd floor. We still can't hit the fire yet. Because even up to this date, the town still did not prepare and upgrade the water distribution in the center of town in Westborough. There was no water. When the first crews arrived and took the lines off the hydrants before they hooked up to the pumpers, this is as far as they could get the fire. First floor. So the fire chief for years have been after the selectmen to upgrade the water supply. Well, after little tiny Westborough was on the news all over New England of this disastrous fire, and it was written up in one of the premier fire engineering and management books and magazines that go out through the country about the failure of the town. It was the town leader's responsibility of this fire. The selectmen vowed never again. And they built a new high pressure water system in town. If you, up to maybe 10 years ago, you saw 2 color hydrants in town, some were red, some were yellow. The red ones were still on the old gravity fed water system. The yellow hydrants were on a high pressure water system with the standpipes. Here's the aftermath. The building on the top left, that's the Chase Paper building.
What are some of the streets there?
The street going from left to right is Milk Street. The street going from the left-hand corner up to the top right, that's Phillip Street. Okay, does that help everybody?
It's where the fire station is now.
Right, all right on the right-hand corner, you'll just see a corner of the fire station. You can see one little window of it. A street going down the middle, that's Grove Street. Okay. Over 20 buildings, multiple houses were severely damaged. 2 were completely destroyed. You'll see some pictures of the gas stations were completely destroyed. There was a car dealership, a used car dealership on Milk Street. If you've ever saw the pictures of the fires out in California, after the big fire went through here last year, you saw all the cars burned on the side of the road and burned up. That's exactly the way this looked. I've seen the pictures, that's in the movie that's gonna be restored. All the burnt out cars, all that, the burnt out buildings, the burnt out gas stations. The fire station actually caught fire. The rear corner of the fire station caught fire from all the embers. And you'll say, geez, how could the fire station caught fire? That's quite a bit of ways away. That's why. That's taken from across the street, directly across from the fire station. The only thing between the fire station and the building is that house. That's Travis Texaco, right inside. I don't know if you remember, how many you remember Joe Travi? He worked there, and Paul Douse, former deputy fire chief, worked at VAC for their firewalls, and he also worked over there for Joe Travi pumping gas. Now on the other side of this Texaco gas station, we had another gas station. Now, here's one of the issues with the building. The buildings outside was very old and dry and thin. The building itself, the structure was very substantial with, 8 by 10s, 10 by 12s, all these floor joists. So what happened was the outside of the building burned off. And then you have just the skeleton of the burning. And the fire just became tremendous. And then it would collapse in on itself and it would shoot the flames. The newspaper report said over 200 feet tall. And the Telegram and Gazette sent a plane out to photograph, and there are about a dozen spectacular photos of the fire that are in the TNG archives. You can see how high the flames are there. This building itself is probably 60 feet tall, so we get flames extending, another at least 20, 30 feet above that. Now we're looking back towards the center of town. This is from the other station. This is where the present gas station is now, right there on the corner, Phillips and Milk. Amoco station, that's the one that ended up becoming Joe's Jenny. And that's Travis in the background. And this is looking across the street. That fire hydrant was the first fire hydrant they took. They had to leave that fire hydrant rather quickly because of the heat of the fire. 2 of the fire trucks were scorched and ended up being restored and repainted. But it was horrible, horrible fire.
Oh my gosh.
Ooh.
Yep. You can see the house in the background, all scorched. That's over on Phillip Street. They spent days putting out the hot spots in this fire. This is all the machinery and different equipment. Remember too, back then they had a big motor in the bottom that would power a series of belts. They had large pulleys that would actually go from floor to floor to floor. If you go inside the Westborough, the old Westborough Weaving Building, which is right on the corner of Spring Street and Milk Street, the big brick building, it's 3 stories, where they used to park all the school buses.
Yeah.
They have some of the old pulleys and some of the big wheels still in there, where they used to have power in the basement and it would go up on every floor. They'd have great big huge axles and they have different pulleys, different sizes, and they could run different equipment from one piece of equipment in the basement. So everything was open, so the fire was able to spread. But all this equipment was all metal, it all caused it all crashed down in the basement of the building. Now, the interesting thing, we still had photographers back then. So what did they do? Let's make matchbooks of the big fire. Anything to make a buck, right? Only one I've ever seen, I actually came across that at a paper show down in Connecticut. I thought it was pretty cool. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. And there were no matches in it, so I wonder if that was what lit the fire. So all that debris ended up on the ground underneath this building. So when the town bought this piece of property, which was the former VAC building, which was on top of that, that was just a slab. When they dug out the slab and they started to go in and start excavating to put in all the utilities, they found almost everything that you see in that other picture. They found 3 oil tanks, some of them still full of kerosene in them. They found all sorts of equipment. There was a much added expense to the town because that was unanticipated. Everybody assumed that was probably removed when they built the the building, but no, they didn't, they just filled it in. Very similar to what they did down at Bay State Commons. There's still a lot of structures underneath Bay State Commons, part of the old Bay State. When I went down there, I had to supervise all the hazardous materials being removed before they closed. I looked and I could see these blue spray painted marks on the steel girders in the building up about 9 feet of the air. And I said, what's that? And I said, that's where the new fill level is going to be. That's how much fill they brought in. And underneath the cement, you remember a lot of hydraulic equipment, they had sumps where some of the hydraulic oil would go into it, the bottoms of the machines. So, under Bay State Commons now, it was all okay by the EPA. They cleaned up all the liquids, but then they capped everything, just like they do on these hazardous waste sites, like they did it up at Acamaca off of Boda Street. You know, there's a lot of debris up there, but it's been covered over and it's got a membrane on it. And so it'll never go anywhere. It's trapped there forever. So, and then they built the fire station, so it's kind of ironic that the biggest fire in Worcester is the site of the Westborough Fire Department. And with that,
I have one last thing. As I age gracefully, I have to try to figure out what I'm going to do with a lot of my items. I've been slowly trying to give them away to certain people that I knew that would appreciate them. I met this wonderful gentleman when I had a problem with one of my bank accounts down at Avidia Bank. So, and I noticed he had a couple of, remember the little Chase and Sanborn little banks, little tiny tin banks?
Yeah.
Well, I have a couple that say Westborough Savings Bank. And they had a little key on the bottom and you put the money in the top and a little brass plate on bill. So I said, this guy really helped me out. I think he likes banks and he works in a bank. So I gave him to him, you thought I'd give him $1 million. So tonight we have a Civil War sword that was the property of Lieutenant Fairbanks of Westborough, who was participating in the Civil War, got injured in the Civil War, recovered, came back to Westborough, became a postmaster, started an insurance company, and was also on the state legislature. So with this, I would think that the better place to have this instead of sitting in my cellar is here with the Historical Society. So I present this to you.
Thank you. And it's all inscribed.
Yes.
In better light, I'll be able to read what it says. Need a magnifier.
It says China, something.
I don't think so.
It doesn't say China. I just made that up.